The city never sleeps. Horns blare, subway doors slam, skyscrapers glitter against the night sky, and yet somewhere in the shadows of New York's endless rhythm, another kind of pulse beats quietly. In tucked-away rooms, behind the counters of herbal shops, or inside apartments transformed into sacred spaces, ancient voices still whisper. They come not from Wall Street or Broadway, but from Africa's oldest traditions, brought here through generations of migration, memory, and survival. New York is a city of reinvention. It consumes, transforms, and redefines everything that arrives on its shores. But some things resist being swallowed. Some things, like ancestral wisdom, carry too much power to vanish. This is the story of African healers in New York City, keepers of remedies, rituals, and wisdom that stretch back thousands of years. Picture a Brooklyn apartment where the smell of burning sage blends with the sharp bitterness of kola nut, where candlelight flickers against walls lined with ancestral photos. In the Bronx, a botanica stands with shelves stacked from floor to ceiling, jars of herbs labeled in Yoruba, Twi, and Kikongo, languages that have traveled oceans. In Harlem, a living room pulses with the deep rhythm of drumming, the sound weaving its way beneath the constant hum of traffic outside. These are not performances for tourists. They are living, breathing rituals of survival, healing, and connection carried into the heart of one of the world's most modern cities. And people come. They come quietly, sometimes hesitantly. A lawyer drained from endless cases, a graduate student overwhelmed by anxiety, a mother mourning the loss of her child. They knock on doors carrying exhaustion, grief, or confusion, and leave with something far less tangible but infinitely more powerful: a renewed sense of balance, identity, and peace. For some, it's relief from physical pain. For others, it's the first time they feel truly seen. One healer in Brooklyn, a Yoruba priestess known to her community as Mama Sade, begins her mornings not with the sound of alarms but with chants passed down through generations. Her small altar, covered with white cloth, cowrie shells, and offerings of fruit, becomes a bridge between past and present. To outsiders, it may look like simple ritual. To those who step into her space, it feels like stepping into another world, one where time slows and the city outside no longer dictates the rhythm of life. This isn't a revival born out of nostalgia. It's not about recreating the past. It's about reclaiming power in the present. African healers in New York City are bridging past and future, weaving herbs, prayers, and rituals into lives overwhelmed by speed and technology. Their practices are ancient, but their relevance is strikingly modern. For centuries, African healing traditions were dismissed, hidden, or even outlawed. Yet here, amid the towering steel of Manhattan and the chaos of the subway, they thrive again, quiet, resilient, and powerful. In a world where so many people feel unmoored, they are anchors. In a time when science and spirituality are often seen as enemies, they create bridges. This journey is about more than medicine. It's about memory, identity, and the human need for meaning. Over the next 20 minutes, you'll step into hidden corners of New York, meet voices carrying centuries of wisdom, and discover how African healers are transforming the city's spirit, one ritual at a time. Because even in a place where everything moves fast, some truths are timeless. And in New York City, ancestral wisdom is not just surviving. It's alive, it's breathing, and it's calling. Long before New York City rose into the sky, long before ships carried people across oceans against their will, healing was already a central part of African life. Across the vast continent, communities relied on systems of knowledge that were as sophisticated as they were sacred. These systems were not written in textbooks or stored in hospitals. They were carried in memory, in ritual, in the hands of healers who became bridges between the seen and unseen. In West Africa, the Yoruba tradition of Ifa emphasized divination, herbal medicine, and spiritual balance. A healer, known as a Babalawo or Iyanifa, was more than a doctor. They were a storyteller, a counselor, and a spiritual guide. Every remedy carried not just physical ingredients, but prayers, invocations, and the wisdom of ancestors. Healing was never just about curing illness. It was about restoring harmony between the body, the spirit, and the community. Among the Akan of Ghana, herbalists and spiritual leaders worked with plants not merely for their chemical properties, but for their spiritual essence. Each leaf, each root carried a story, its power understood through centuries of observation and ancestral teaching. Healing could involve drinking a tea, but it could also involve drumming, dance, or ritual to cleanse a spirit weighed down by grief or conflict. In southern Africa, Zulu and Xhosa healers, Izangoma and Izinyanga, used divination with bones, herbs, and ritual chants. Their work was not individualistic. It connected the living to the ancestors, acknowledging that sickness often pointed to deeper ruptures between people, between generations, or between humans and the land itself. To heal the body was to heal relationships, to restore wholeness where something had broken. Across Africa, healing was communal. Villages recognized their healers as essential figures, guardians of knowledge who held both medicinal science and spiritual authority. Their wisdom was tested through centuries, refined not in laboratories, but in lived experience, trial, and survival. These traditions were not primitive, as colonial narratives once claimed. They were complex, holistic systems designed to keep communities alive in body and in soul. And though each region of Africa developed its own unique practices, they shared a fundamental truth. Healing could not be separated from spirituality. Illness was never just physical. It could be rooted in broken connections, with family, with ancestors, with community, or with nature. To treat the symptom without addressing the spirit was to miss the point entirely. This deep intertwining of medicine, ritual, and identity created a foundation that endured even the most violent ruptures of history. When Africans were forced into the holds of ships and scattered across the world, they carried with them more than memories of home. They carried seeds of rituals, herbs, songs, and prayers. Seeds that would survive in whispers, in hidden practices, and eventually in new soil. Those seeds would take root far from the African continent. And centuries later, they would find new life in places like New York City. But before we arrive at that present, we must trace the journey of how healing crossed the ocean and survived against the odds. When the first slave ships set sail from Africa to the Americas, they carried more than human cargo. Beneath the chains and suffering, they carried memory. Songs, prayers, rhythms, and rituals tucked away in the minds and hearts of those forced into the unknown. For many, healing was not just about survival, it was resistance. It was a way to hold on to dignity and humanity in a world designed to strip both away. Across the Caribbean and the Americas, African traditions took root in hidden, transformed, and sometimes disguised ways. In Cuba, Yoruba Ifa practices intertwined with Catholic saints to become Santeria. In Haiti, Vodou emerged, blending West African spiritual systems with French Catholic imagery. In Brazil, Candomblé preserved the Orishas under layers of colonial suppression. These were not simple mixtures. They were acts of cultural resilience, where African healers preserved their wisdom by speaking it through new languages, symbols, and rituals. The healing traditions themselves survived in the same way. Herbs be quiet pharmacy for the enslaved, used to treat wounds and illnesses when doctors refused care. Songs became medicine for the spirit, carrying hidden prayers within their rhythms. Divination adapted, sometimes practiced behind closed doors, sometimes disguised as fortune-telling. Rituals continued at night, under moonlight, in forests and swamps far from the eyes of overseers. Even in North America, where suppression was often more severe, healing endured. Rootwork and conjure, sometimes called hoodoo, emerged in the American South, blending African herbal knowledge with indigenous practices and European folk traditions. These systems carried not only remedies for physical illness, but also protections against violence, injustice, and despair. For the enslaved, a healer was not only a doctor. They were a shield, a guide, and a reminder that the ancestors were still present. When the Great Migration of the early 20th century brought millions of African Americans north, these practices traveled with them. Harlem, already a cultural center of the Black experience, became home to root doctors, spiritualists, and herbalists who continued traditions passed down quietly for generations. Botanicas, first established by Puerto Rican and Dominican communities in New York, became shared spaces where African and Caribbean healing blended in the city's multicultural fabric. By the late 20th century, waves of new African immigration from Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and the Congo breathed fresh life into these traditions. Healers arrived in New York carrying practices not as remnants, but as living, active systems still deeply rooted in Africa. They joined the descendants of enslaved Africans, whose practices had survived centuries of erasure, creating a city where multiple streams of African healing converged. The story of healing in the diaspora is a story of survival against impossible odds. It is about knowledge carried in secret, whispered from one generation to the next. It is about rituals that disguise themselves in foreign clothing, only to emerge later still vibrant and whole. And today, in New York City, those threads converge. Centuries of wisdom woven into the modern lives of people searching for balance in a city that never slows down. Walk through the streets of New York City, and you might not immediately notice the presence of African healing. The neon lights, the endless traffic, the towering billboards, they seem to leave no room for the sacred. But if you look closer, past the storefronts and crowded sidewalks, you'll find another New York hidden in plain sight. In the Bronx, small botanicas line the streets. Their windows display candles in every color, statues of saints, and shelves stacked with bottles of oils and powders. Step inside, and you're greeted by the earthy aroma of dried herbs, the faint sound of prayer music, and the quiet hum of customers seeking remedies for ailments that modern pharmacies don't always heal. Here, a simple purchase might carry more than a product. It carries a tradition, an instruction whispered through generations. Brooklyn has become a hub for a new generation of healers, many of them blending African traditions with contemporary wellness practices. Yoga studios coexist with spaces for drum circles. Herbal teas are sold next to tinctures prepared using recipes rooted in Yoruba or Congolese knowledge. Some healers hold ceremonies in loft apartments, where candles and ancestral altars transform the industrial city into a sanctuary. Others host community gatherings in parks, offering cleansing rituals under the open sky. Harlem, with its deep history as the heart of Black culture in America, holds some of the city's oldest threads of healing. Spiritual readers, root workers, and herbalists have been part of Harlem's story since the Harlem Renaissance. Today, their presence continues, sometimes in quiet apartments where consultations are done by word of mouth, sometimes in public spaces where healing circles welcome anyone who comes with an open heart. Harlem streets carry echoes of both the African-American struggle for survival and the African traditions that offered strength along the way. New York's diversity makes it unique. Here, Yoruba priests from Nigeria share space with Haitian Vodou priests, Ghanaian herbalists, and Congolese spiritual leaders. The city's multicultural fabric means that traditions once separated by oceans now coexist side by side. A person searching for guidance can walk a few blocks and find divination with cowrie shells, a Haitian healing bath, or a Ghanaian herbal consultation, all within the same neighborhood. And the seekers are just as diverse. African immigrants find connection to their roots, Caribbean communities continue traditions passed down through family. But increasingly, people from outside these cultures, young professionals, artists, students, are drawn to African healing. They come searching for balance in a city that exhausts them, or meaning in a world that often feels empty of it. In these spaces, ancestry and identity blend with curiosity and the universal human need for wholeness. New York City may seem like the last place ancestral traditions could thrive, but in truth, it is the perfect place. Its noise creates a hunger for silence. Its chaos creates a need for grounding. And its diversity creates a meeting point where traditions not only survive but flourish in ways their originators might never have imagined. Here, in the most unlikely of places, African healing traditions are not just preserved. They are alive, evolving, and shaping the city's soul. And behind every herb, every prayer, every ritual, there are healers whose stories reveal the human heartbeat keeping these traditions alive. Behind every tradition are people, keepers of wisdom, whose stories breathe life into the rituals they carry. In New York City, the faces of African healing are as diverse as the communities they serve. Each healer has their own journey, but together they weave a tapestry of resilience and renewal. One of them is Mama Sade, a Yoruba priestess in Brooklyn. Her journey began in Lagos, where she was trained in the Ifa tradition from a young age. She arrived in New York decades ago, working first as a nurse's aide before opening her small home as a place of healing. Today, her apartment is a sanctuary where candles flicker on an altar adorned with cowrie shells, palm oil, and photographs of ancestors. People visit her seeking clarity through divination. With cowrie shells spread on a white cloth, she interprets patterns that reveal guidance for the living. A young man comes in, exhausted by financial struggles. She speaks not only of his challenges, but of his strength, urging him to honor his ancestors and find balance before chasing success. He leaves lighter, carrying more than advice, carrying a renewed sense of belonging. In the Bronx lives Kwame, a Ghanaian herbalist who learned his craft from his grandmother in Kumasi. His shop looks like a mix between an apothecary and a small grocery. Shelves overflow with jars of roots, dried leaves, and powders labeled in English and Twi. Some customers come for teas that ease insomnia or stomach aches. Others come for remedies that have no equivalent in pharmacies. Cleansing herbs for spiritual heaviness, tonics for courage, mixtures for resilience. Kwame believes every plant has a spirit, and when prepared with intention, that spirit works with the body to restore balance. A Dominican mother visits him, her daughter struggling with anxiety. Kwame prepares a calming blend of passion flower, lemon balm, and African leaves rarely found outside Ghana. Weeks later, she returns, not only for more herbs, but to tell him her daughter is finally sleeping through the night. For Kwame, that is healing. Not just treatment, but transformation. And in Harlem, we meet Chantal, a Congolese healer who blends traditional rituals with psychology. Having studied both anthropology and counseling, she bridges two worlds often seen as separate. In her sessions, clients may sit across from her in a circle of candles, where she invites them to speak their pain aloud. Then, with soft chants in Lingala, she leads them into ritual cleansing, using water, smoke, and rhythm to release what weighs them down. One evening, a young artist arrives, burdened by grief after losing his father. Chantal guides him through a ceremony that allows him to cry, to drum, to speak to his ancestors. He leaves with tears still on his face, but also with a new understanding that grief is not weakness. It is a connection to those who came before. These are not isolated stories. They are echoes of a larger truth. African healing in New York City is alive because healers adapt without losing their roots. Some work in quiet apartments, some in shops, some in community centers. Some blend tradition with modern science, while others hold to practices passed down unchanged for centuries. But all of them share a commitment to one thing: healing that goes beyond the physical, reaching into the spirit and restoring the human soul. And for those who come seeking their help, the question is not whether the rituals are old or new, traditional or modern. The only question that matters is this: does it heal? In a city filled with hospitals, pharmacies, and urgent care clinics on every corner, the question arises: why do people still seek African healers? The answer lies in the spaces that medicine often leaves empty. Modern life in New York is relentless. The city pushes people to the edge: long work hours, constant stress, and the feeling of being disconnected from community and even from oneself. A pill may calm the body, but it does not always heal the spirit. Therapy may ease the mind, but it does not always mend the wound of feeling rootless. For many, African healing offers what modern systems cannot: wholeness. For members of the African diaspora, visiting a healer is often about reconnecting with identity. A Ghanaian immigrant who hasn't returned home in decades finds comfort in the smell of herbs that remind him of his grandmother's remedies. A Nigerian-American student raised in a world where her traditions were dismissed as superstition sits with a priestess and feels, for the first time, that her heritage is not a burden, but a blessing. For these seekers, healing is not only about the body, it is about belonging. Others come from outside the community, drawn by curiosity or desperation. A Wall Street professional exhausted by burnout steps into a healer's apartment after therapy and medication have failed to bring relief. There, instead of being treated as a diagnosis, he is seen as a whole person. He leaves not with a prescription, but with a ritual of cleansing that restores a sense of balance he didn't know he had lost. A young artist, struggling with creative block, finds in drumming circles and ancestral chants a rhythm that reawakens her spirit. For her, healing becomes inspiration. Then there are those who come seeking answers science cannot always provide. Questions of purpose, of grief, of spiritual unrest. A mother who has lost her child visits a healer, not for medicine, but for a space where her pain can be acknowledged in ritual. where her tears can be part of a sacred process. In a culture that often rushes grief, healers offer her something invaluable: time, presence, and recognition that healing is more than moving on. It is reconnecting with love that does not die. What unites all these stories is the desire for something deeper than treatment. People come to African healers because they are offered connection to ancestors, to community, to their own inner strength. They leave not only with remedies, but with rituals that make them feel less alone in the chaos of the city. In New York, where loneliness can feel louder than the noise of traffic, these practices become a lifeline. And in their growing popularity lies both fascination and tension, because what is embraced by some is still misunderstood, even feared, by others. For every person who finds peace and healing in these traditions, there are others who dismiss them. The world of African healing in New York does not exist without tension. It lives at the crossroads of reverence and ridicule, acceptance and suspicion. For centuries, colonial systems painted African healing as primitive, dangerous, even demonic. These labels did not vanish with time. They lingered, shaping how many people still view traditional practices today. In the eyes of some, a healer's altar looks like superstition. A ritual cleansing looks like theatrics. Divination looks like manipulation. And yet, for those who step inside with openness, these same acts become powerful moments of transformation. Western medicine, with its hospitals, prescriptions, and clinical trials, often struggles to understand practices rooted in spirituality. Doctors may see herbs only as chemical compounds, stripped of the prayers and rituals that give them meaning. Psychologists may recognize drumming as therapeutic, but dismiss the ancestral context that makes it sacred. This clash between science and spirituality creates an uneasy space where African healers are sometimes seen as competitors, rather than collaborators. The tension also lives within the African diaspora itself. Younger generations, raised in societies where their heritage was mocked or feared, may hesitate to embrace it. Some feel embarrassed to tell friends they visited a healer. Others carry trauma from religious teachings that condemned African spirituality as evil. For them, seeking a healer is not just a personal decision. It is an act of courage, a reclaiming of traditions their ancestors were forced to hide. Then there are stories of outright misunderstanding. A healer in Queens once found her ceremonies reported to the landlord as suspicious gatherings. Another practitioner was accused of fraud by a client who expected instant results, misunderstanding that healing is often a process, not a quick fix. These moments reveal the fragile space healers occupy, trusted deeply by some, dismissed or attacked by others. But conflict is not always rejection. It can also spark dialogue. Increasingly, some doctors, therapists, and researchers are beginning to recognize the value of holistic practices. Herbal remedies are studied for their medicinal potential. Drumming circles are used in trauma therapy. Concepts of ancestral healing resonate in psychology's growing focus on generational trauma. Slowly, bridges are being built, though the gap is still wide. What becomes clear is that African healers are not simply fighting stereotypes. They are resisting erasure. Every ritual performed, every herb prepared, every prayer whispered is an act of defiance against centuries of dismissal. In a city where identities constantly clash and collide, their work forces the question: who decides what counts as legitimate healing? The conflict is real, and it is ongoing. But so is the resilience, and it is in that resilience that we find the heartbeat of these traditions, pulsing quietly, powerfully, even in the face of misunderstanding. In the heart of New York City, African healing is not fading into history. It is writing new chapters. What once survived in whispers now speaks openly. What once hid in shadows now stands in the light. And as the city continues to change, so too do the ways these traditions live and breathe. Across the boroughs, healers are adapting. Some now offer consultations over video calls, guiding clients not just from Harlem or Brooklyn, but from across the world. Others create herbal blends that sit on the same shelves as wellness teas and supplements, bringing ancestral remedies into the language of modern health. Community gatherings have multiplied. Rituals of drumming, cleansing, and ancestral honoring now held in parks, cultural centers, and even art galleries. These events don't just preserve tradition, they reintroduce it as something vital for modern life. For the younger generation, these practices have become a way to reclaim identity in a city that often fragments it. Second-generation African and Caribbean Americans are turning to healers to reconnect with them their parents or grandparents sometimes hesitated to pass down. In these spaces, they discover that tradition is not old-fashioned. It is alive, and it belongs to them. And it's not just the diaspora. Increasingly, people from every background are embracing African healing, not as cultural tourism, but as genuine medicine for the soul. They are drawn not only to the herbs and rituals, but to the philosophy, the belief that healing is not just about curing illness, but about restoring balance. In a world fractured by stress, isolation, and disconnection, this philosophy feels more urgent than ever. What was once seen as superstition is slowly gaining recognition as science catches up. Researchers now study herbs long used by African healers. Therapists use drumming and movement in trauma recovery. Psychologists explore the impact of ancestral memory on mental health. Slowly, the walls between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge are beginning to crumble. And yet, beyond the science, beyond the acceptance, there is something more. African healing in New York is not only about plants, prayers, or rituals. It is about memory. It is about survival. It is about the refusal to let centuries of suppression silence voices that carry wisdom far older than this city itself. Every ceremony, every chant, every consultation is a bridge between the past and the future. As we walk away from this story, one truth remains. Even in the busiest city on earth, there is space for silence. Even in the most modern world, there is room for the ancient. African healers in New York City are living proof that ancestral wisdom is not gone. It is here, evolving, breathing, guiding. If this journey opened your eyes, share it. If it stirred something in you, let it grow. And if you want to see more stories that uncover hidden worlds and timeless wisdom, subscribe to this channel and join us. Because the story of healing is far from over. And together, we can keep it alive.